One. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 91 today. And I am here with my guest, Tara. She came on the show a long time ago last year. Welcome back, Tara. It's a pleasure having you again. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me on, and bonjour from Paris, France.
Comment allez-vous?
Ça va bien, et toi?
That's all I can do. I can say très bien, and that's it. How's
all
things?
you need to know is oui croissant, and you're good.
So, what have you been up to today in France? Anything much? Anything good?
Well, in France, it's been a relatively quiet week since we had two big protests that happened last week, which on the Janvier of 19, which was Le Grève, the strike, that was organized by the 8 biggest unions here in France. And this is the first time in over a decade that these unions have come together in solidarity to be protesting the proposed pension reform. So that took place on last Thursday. And then on Saturday, we saw the youth organizations and left-wing political parties call for a massive rally also that took place here in Paris. The one that was on Thursday was a nationwide walkout strike with, they estimated 1.1 million people participated, with over hundreds of thousands of people walking out of their jobs and basically paralyzing the country for a day. So this week's been relatively quiet. There was a baker's protest that unfortunately I missed because I didn't see that was going on. And the optics from that one looked amazing. The French people were holding the baguettes and croissants as they were marching in protest for the cost of living crisis. So that was another major protest that happened here on the streets of Paris. That one went off without a hitch. You had Black Bloc that had come to steal the show a bit on Saturdays and Thursday's protest. So they tend to make an appearance. But Monday's Baker's protest was peaceful.
Mm-hmm. Did any good outcome come out of those protests? Did they succeed in changing anything? Because Macron, hasn't been very good when it comes to listening to the people of France, especially, during his tyranny, where he was just bringing all these COVID rules in. And especially, how he's not done enough to fight the immigration problem. Because when I look at Paris right now, Tara, I mean, Paris is just like a third world dump. It's a mess. It is not like as good as it used to be.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate because Paris has been a long time one of my most favorite cities. And honestly, like the times that I have been coming over the last couple of years, especially since post-COVID, you can't help but walk down the street and smell like even the smell of piss in the streets. And then it's not safe at night. There's a lot of crime. And I'm always warned amongst my friends, like, hey, don't be taking the subway like once it gets dark, but it's getting dark already it gets dark at 6:30, it's winter. So it's impossible not to be taking the metro system. But you have to be constantly on guard because there's high risk to just walking around and you're not safe in the streets of Paris. And there's a lot of graffiti around. So it feels very ominous. So it's definitely changed in terms of ambiance since I've been coming here throughout the years. And that was part of, like, as I talked to a lot of my French and my Parisian friends about pension reform, that they feel that they shouldn't be putting forward the cornerstone of the reforms to take a step back is to increase the age from 62 to 64, and then also to increase the number of years in contribution to be able to receive a full pension. And so France has a pay-as-you-go type system where the current workers pay for those that are retired. So when the pension system was initially
put, how much do they earn?
So with pensions, part of the reforms is to right now they're earning, I believe, a full pension is around 1,200 euros, and the proposal is to also increase it though to 1,300. But a lot of the arguments of, like, even if you're going to increase like the amount of the pension, Macron's trying to use that as a way of dissuading people to say, like, oh, we're going to be giving more in pension. But there's a big discrepancy in terms of, like, the longevity of people's life. People are living longer these days, but in terms of those who are living in poverty and in those circumstances, they won't live as long as those who are not in poverty. So to even reach to the age of 64, are you truly going to be even able to enjoy this pension? So it's currently like 1,200, which they say, like, France has one of the most generous pension systems in Europe and also in terms of the world. But like the
Would you say
benefits
it's
of
the
that,
best in Europe? Would you say it's the best in Europe?
arguably, and that can be seen in terms of they have the second lowest rate of senior poverty levels, and in terms of the OECD countries, it has the less people living in poverty than the United States, than Germany, than Sweden. So it is a generous pension system that is part of the social value. And so with the unions coming forward and calling for protests, like when we saw the mobilization of people taking to the streets, it's not people who are just part of the union that are taking to the streets. They pulled like 7 out of 10 even teachers were taking to the streets. So there's a strong societal value that comes to the pensions. And at first, as an American, I didn't really understand it. So I was trying to, when I'm talking to people, understand from the French cultural perspective as to why is this so controversial for people to be taking to the
Because
streets
France
for it?
have the socialist type of view when it comes to this, don't they? In a way.
Yes, they see it as a social gain. So they're very and a social progress. So when these pensions were put into place after World War II, they saw this as a progress and a victory for the labor unions and the labor movements. So they feel this is a fundamental attack on their rights, their human rights. And so it's part of French culture to enjoy life. Like it's illegal to work on weekends. It's retirement is attuned to the end of the workday, to their Sundays, to like in the middle of the day. A lot of restaurants are even closed. Like if you go for a French restaurant, they're usually closed from 2 to 7. And so that just shows like the value of people have for their time. And arguably, like if you're going to be working 7 days a week versus like 6 days a week, are you truly increasing your productivity? And like in America, I feel like so many Americans are like workhorses, and what does that actually do to our bodies? Like obesity rate is so high in America. What, like 1 out of 4 people are obese? I mean, that has to do with like how we're living our lives. And I feel like coming from the corporate world, before I was reporting, I was working as a management consultant, and I got to say, like I became very unhealthy with my lifestyle of working
What
sometimes
year
till
was
like
this again?
1 o'clock at
What year
night.
was this when you were working as a management consultant?
I was working as a management consultant after university till 2017. The end of 2017 is when I left my corporate job. So I worked in as a management consultant for about 6 years, up to manager, and then I just got massively unhealthy. I gained so much weight. I was depressed from it, and so I knew I had to have a change in lifestyle. So I took a step back, though it was a big pay cut in my life in general. I was a lot happier to take that step back and to have a better like work-life balance. And so from the American perspective, I feel like we're so ingrained into just working. So when here in France, they see it as like pushing people to work to age 64 is just pushing more people to be in 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 the economy, like to like just to work until they die, basically. So I can now understand more like with the value of it being a social gain, that if the government's going to be chipping away at this, what else is going to be left? Like if the government in the US, which they're chipping away at our at our human God-given rights. If the government takes away a right, you're never going to get that back. And so that's akin to what's happening here on the streets of France, and how people feel about the retirement system, about the pension system, because it's something that is glorified. It's one of the most generous in Europe and in the world, and it's something that is a source of national pride, because it's a system of solidarity between the generations.
Mm-hmm. What would you say when you were covering that protest was the craziest incident? Because I did see a little bit; it was getting very roughy. What was the craziest moment that you saw in that protest?
Well, the craziest moment that I saw is you have what are called Black Bloc protesters. We know them as Antifa in the U.S., and they are on. I would say that they are on the left wing. These are left wing protests that are being organized, but they don't seem to be part of the protest in itself, because you have a parade of floats, of balloons, and of people going down. And so the start of the line, I would notice in both of the protests that I covered that the Black Bloc protesters would then start their own line that's in front of the official start of the line, where the security of the of of the protest actually like begins. So when they're organizing then in front of there, and they have what is called a direct action, which usually entails a form of violence that happens onto the streets when they're engaging in throwing projectiles with the police. And on Thursday's protest on the 19th, I heard that there were over like 10,000 police that were on standby, and the police do throw tear gas into the crowds to disperse. So that is something that was happening on Thursday's protest when things did turn violent here on the streets of Paris, which it didn't happen in the rest of. You had 1.1 million people taking to the streets all over the country. So that was something that was attuned to happening here in Paris. So that
Would
was
you say
definitely
it
a
was
crazy
the
moment.
biggest protest in French history?
I wouldn't. I mean, they have the revolution back in the 1700s, so that was definitely a huge protest. So actually, the right to strike is something that is enshrined in their constitution. So that came about in 1864, almost 20 years before the right to unionize had become a constitutional right as well. And so you can say that the right to strike and the right to protest is part of the French DNA, because it's part of the culture here to, even those who are not participating actively in the protest, they still sympathize and are in support of those who are protesting, because it is a value here in the society to look onto those who are willing to stick it to the man, to fight against the government or these regimes, so they are in support of it. In terms of it, this is definitely one of the biggest that has happened in recent years. It's the first time in 12 years that all of the major 8 unions have come together in solidarity to all be present, to be all calling for strikes, and to be on the same page in front. So in 2019, Macron had also tried to introduce these reforms. It's part of what he ran for in his election. It was part of his platform. He had vows of reforming the pension system, because it is going to be running into a deficit. So it's a tiered approach that they're looking to prevent from a huge major deficit that is said to occur in 2030. But so he ran on these reforms, and he tried to initially implement them back in 2019. It was also met by massive protests, and then ultimately was put to the side due to the COVID pandemic.
What are the 8 unions in France, like the 8 big unions, and what are their roles and what do each one represent?
I don't know in detail all 8 unions, but for example, like the railway workers and each of the unions that a part of there's a third cornerstone that's coming about from these reforms, and that has to do with the different schemes. France has dozens of different pension schemes, 42 or 43 to be exact. And what that means is each of the different sectors that work, like for instance, ballerinas or part of the French opera, they're able to actually retire. Ballerinas are able to retire as early as 42, and the railway workers, for instance, the drivers for that, they can retire as early as 54. And so these are the individual schemes for retirement that you have. So for an example of the unions, it would be like the railway workers. So you did have you had massive closures and strikes going on with the forms of transportation. That was on Janvier 19.
When you compare French politics, Tara, to American politics, what do you think that France does better compared to American politics, and what do you like about the French Constitution that's better than the American Constitution? And what do you think
Well,
America can learn from France's way of doing politics and France's constitution?
there's definitely a lot of things that I appreciate about the French society and how they organize to strike. You can say that the French have it down to a down to an art, a science, because they are very effective with the way that they present the strikes. The two main things you got to do is have the media attention, and so optics and in order to raise awareness of what's going on. And so visually, like even with the bakers protest, when they're holding up the baguettes and the croissants, like that's visually very, very striking and unique. And the other part of it is inconvenience. So that's with our transportation that's here. A lot of even though it's inconveniencing people are actually in support of it. They see it as a necessary evil to say, so they're okay with being inconvenienced because it's for the greater good. Versus like in America, when for example during COVID protests, though there were a lot of people willing to lose their jobs to say no to the vaccine, in a sense, like, was it enough? Because we went through a quite the period of vaccine requirements in order to be having your job. So if people are able to come more together in that unity that I see here happening in France, I think that's something that we could be learning from in the US. And not to glorify the or promote the violence that is done by the Black Bloc, but even in terms of the type of direct action that I had witnessed here versus what I witnessed in the US. Like in the US, when you have cities like Portland, I felt like the Antifa there, they just arbitrarily attack all of the local businesses that are in a
of course,
surrounding area.
you famously got assaulted by one of them, which was absolutely outrageous and unacceptable.
Yeah, so I feel like when you're arbitrarily attacking all the businesses and people around, like, what cause you actually have. And the truth, like, a true anarchist isn't about, like this downfall of society. It's about keeping government out of your own personal life.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
that's
what
the
I had,
true meaning of anarchism, like being free and liberated.
yeah.
That's one of the Greek philosophical meanings of it.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like that's a difference when you have the Antifa in the US versus Antifa here. Like, I didn't actually feel unsafe covering as a reporter and a street journalist, recording what was going on here. I knew I just had to stay out of the battle between the police and the Black Bloc. And there were, I'm definitely going to get a helmet because there's projectiles going like beer bottles and trees. I saw tree branches flying through the air as well, but there are a lot of projectiles going through. But I never felt like I was the target. Though I guess they right before Black Bloc's about to do their direct action, they were like telling all the journalists and everyone with cameras, put your cameras down. They don't want you to be recording the direct action, which, I mean, as a journalist, we're to be recording anything that's going on. So I didn't really, take kindly to that. But and other press had told me, like, oh, you have to stay back, otherwise they will attack you. Versus like in the US, like they see a camera and they'll just attack you. Here it almost felt like, being in the crowd, there was like massive amount of warning, like before any form of like attack that would go straight to a individual or a person. The French and also the German Antifas tend to have a very a reputation for being very violent, but I am still new to be covering the protests that are here on the scene. But compared to what I've seen in the U.S., like, I feel unsafe when I'm covering the grounds in the U.S. I feel like if you just by merit of being a journalist and press, you're going to be targeted by these groups by the Antifa groups there, and that's not something that I had felt here. And also, like, with the Antifa groups, the Black Bloc here, they were targeting specifically, from what I observed. Maybe this is not the case in all protests, but from what I had observed, they targeted the banks. So it, like, having a targeted approach, it kind of, the meaning, because they are making chants of like anti-capitalism, and so to be then targeting specifically a bank, and you can see from the footage that came out from like Saturday's protest, like the surrounding businesses, they cleared and put their customers inside, and they cleared out of the way, but they were not the target of the violence that was going through. They went straight for that specific bank, and then they set the street on fire in front of the bank when the riot police came out. So a lot of the clashes are between like the Black Bloc protesters to the police, and not so much targeting like the civilians. And then so even when the violence had subsided and the parade had continued, people were still chanting a lot of. You have regularly dressed people that were chanting the Black Bloc slogans. So I can see that actually, like it seemed that regular people were in support of the ideals that these Black Bloc protesters were also promoting, and that's something different than what I see in the U.S. And so when you have when we saw with the BLM riots that had occurred, people lost support of what was going on with BLM, ultimately because of the arbitrary violence that was going on and seeing our U.S. cities burning, and you lose a message when such actions of violence take place.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like very interesting, with all that violence. It's just insane. Tara, so how do you think about the next French election? How are you feeling like towards the future of France, and without going forward? And who would you support in the next French, election? And do you think it's possible for France to be able to take control of itself from the globalists and find the right candidate to be able to find itself to do that?
Well, the French did just have their presidential elections, and in this in the last presidential election, Macron's party did actually lose support in the parliament. So it's a fragile time that he's actually pushing forward with these reforms, because all it takes is a few legislatures to not support the reforms as they're being presented to parliament starting just this past week for it not to go through. But this is his second term, so he's not going to be he doesn't have anything to lose in a sense, because he's not going to be up for re-election. I don't know who's going to be running here in the future. In terms of just the pension reforms, most people do agree that a form of pension reform does have to occur, but I think the government does a very bad job with communicating what's going on with the people, in the sense of, if polls show that 7 out of 10 agree that a reform needs to occur, but then you have this massive mobilization of people taking to the streets for this pension reform, like they for that to be the conundrum and paradox that's going on, the government's not doing a good job with communicating to the people. And in terms of the future as it goes through with specifically for pension reform, there is another greve that has been announced for the 31st of January. And I think this is going to be we're just seeing the early stages of these strikes to be occurring, of these protests to be occurring. And it's exacerbated also by the cost of living crisis that we're seeing here in France, and also that we're feeling in the US and all of Europe. So now, as the French people, and I feel worldwide, we're depressed from the cost of inflation, and it's making it very hard. Like, you're considered rich if you can afford eggs in the US now. And so that's your actual that's your bling, right?
How would you say the price of eggs and the price of bread is in France compared to what it is in the United States?
I was able to buy a baguette the other day for a euro 20. So I feel like the prices have increased from there. I know in the US, the cost of milk has gone up by almost 50%. Cost of wheat has gone up by 30%. And so your basic staples in life to be making bread is it's making it unattainable. I know when I first got here and I went grocery shopping, the shampoo that I'm used to purchasing here, it cost more than twice. So for maybe 3 toiletry items, I ended up spending almost 20 euros. And that was at Franprix, which is a budget, Franprix and Monoprix are their two budget type of grocery stores. So I'm wow, that is ridiculous. And, I live in Florida, so a cost of eggs to be going for organic eggs to be going up to $12. We have chickens, and I was saying to my dad, because he said that the chickens aren't laying eggs because they're old. And I'm you got to put those chickens to work, or, if they're not holding their weight, we got to get new chickens and release these other chickens to the wild, because if they're not producing eggs, it becomes ridiculous. And They have refinery strikes that have also been announced. There's two days of refinery strikes. I believe that's February 6th and February 7th for the next ones. But they had refinery strikes back last fall. And my friends here said that they had to queue for almost 2 hours to be getting petrol from the gas stations. And so, though this is a massive
Yes, I did
inconvenience
see
to.
that. I did see,
Mhm.
like in Paris, they like were having a massive thing, and it's just like looks like a socialist country, and everyone in France is going crazy.
Mhm.
And this, it's scary, Tara, because this was like just the
Mhm.
beginning of it in a way, which is even more
Yes.
insane. Because like if you think about it, imagine how bad it's going to get. When the inflation gets worse and more money going to Ukraine. It's like the winter of death is just coming up now, as they say. Well, the
Mhm.
supposed winter of death, because they've been going on about that for like,
Mhm.
but yeah, it's just insane. A lot of the inflation problems that's being seen in Europe. I mean, even in like Germany and Britain, man, like people fighting over, petrol. It's just insane.
Mhm. And I think that it's important for these protests to be happening, and I hope more people are going to be joining in to be fighting the government for this, because this is just a layperson's opinion, but it feels like they just want us to be able to accept that, to break our backs, and then ultimately be very submissive to this new world order that they're trying to establish. And so when people are taking to the streets and saying like, no, we're not going to take it, I think it's a good thing to be fighting for. So when they're chipping away at the French pension system, they feel they're chipping away at their what they see as their fundamental rights. And so anytime that the government's going to be chipping away at our fundamental rights, what we see as Americans as well, we need to be fighting for that, because you take your eye off of that, once it's gone, it's gone. You're never going to get that back. And that we're seeing that happen all around the world, from the overthrow that's happening in Peru and Brazil. People need to be standing up against the government, otherwise we're gonna have a new world order established, and I don't want to eat bugs. I'm not going to be happy with that. So.
Well, in my opinion, Tara, I think, especially with Ukraine losing the war on the elitists and BRICS is happening, which you could argue is a good thing, because BRICS is going to help a lot of countries like Russia, India, and a lot of African nations be free. So if you think about it, I kind of think the New World Order is losing, because I think a lot of people are waking up. That everyone knows their plans, are in the garbage now, because everyone does not having that. Tara, I was just, besides speaking about politics, I was just saying, what is your favorite holiday, like tourist destination, like would you say in Paris? And what is the one thing you love about French culture? And who is your favorite, French poet of all time? And your favorite French piece of artwork?
So my favorite architecture building here is the Palais Garnier, and so that's the Paris Opera House. And Gaston Lenormand is the author of Phantom of the Opera, which was made into a musical by Andrew Lloyd Webber. That's among my favorite French literature. I'm a huge fan of Voltaire, and of Les Miserables is one of my favorite books by Victor Hugo, the who also wrote Notre Dame, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So I've been a Francophile since a young age. It was the first. Paris and London were the first international countries, other than Poland and the Philippines, which I'm ethnically from. These countries are the first ones that my parents had taken me to. So I have always been a fan of French culture and French history, and I think that also now marries into how I feel about politics, because it's the spirit of the people to be rising up and making a stance against the government, which was, of course, like we the iconic French Revolution. And so the streets of Paris, you feel that it's poetry in the air. So it's unfortunate to see its downfall like this, but I have high hopes for it to be returning to that type of like Renaissance and feel that you have, because it's the architecture is beautiful, the history is steeped in its modernity, just as you walk down the Champs-Elysees and to see like the Eiffel Tower, which is iconic and relates to the feelings that we have also with freedom in America. I love French food as well. I think that the French have a natural way of elevating everything.
What's your
Um,
favorite French dish? Like dish?
I love steak tartare. I love a croque monsieur, which is just a simple like sandwich. Everything to me almost like tastes better here. So
Well,
I was very
the
thrilled to
the
be
other day,
returning back
I
to
actually got
France.
one of my I got one of my family members, French custard. the
Mhm.
orange custard, and it's so tasty, Tara. It's
The
so
pastries
nice,
are
and like
amazing. Like the millefeuille, which is like a folded pastry dessert,
yeah.
is so delicious. And something as basic like as a croissant is it's those little joys in life that I can be walking down the street eating a French croissant and just enjoying. So I think that also then relates to the how they feel about retirement and their weekends. And it blew my mind when I found out it was illegal to work on the weekends here. And I think that's something that can be adopted by in the US is the enjoyment of life, because in a sense, like when it relates to your own individual productivity, are you actually becoming more of a productive member to
Oh
your
yeah, that's what
to your
Western
country or to
civilization
your
is supposed
yeah.
to be about. Like in England, if you look at the political system, that's basically a monarchical system. It doesn't relate to English culture. English culture is about being free. Welsh culture is about being
Mhm.
free. Scottish culture is about being free. Russian culture is about being free. American culture is about being free. Same thing in New Zealand, Australia. But it's this corporate system that we've had that's controlled by the bankers, the elitists, the Rothschild and Rockefellers, which is used to control us. That's
Mhm.
just,
So are you actually free?
well, maybe not as we were back then, but
Mhm.
we're not as free as we. Sorry, I was supposed to say we're definitely not as free as we are now than we were back then, because we were much more
Mhm.
free back then. Economically and stuff. We didn't have an income tax. We didn't have a lot of these taxes that were coming in. But as you were saying about French food, I my when I first tried, snail on
Mhm.
bread, I was blown away by how nice it was, man. How nice,
Yeah.
frog legs were. Well, I was amazed how
Yeah,
nice
exactly.
it was.
I
You would
love
expect
frog legs. I love snails. I escargot. I think when it's lathered in the butter, they definitely have a way of making everything taste very good.
What would you say? Also, is your another favorite city of in France besides Paris?
I was fortunate to spend about 2 weeks in Lille, which is in the north part of France. I stayed there for about 2 weeks last fall, and then I was also living in Montpellier in the south of France for almost 2 months.
Beautiful
So
place,
I have
Montpellier. Isn't it?
I've spent a good amount of time not just in Paris itself, but I've been to Strasbourg and Colmar, and Colmar is so picturesque. It looks like the village from Beauty and the Beast. So it's so different. And then I liked Lille also. When I was there, people are like, "What are you doing here?" Because they don't see very many young American tourists. And it was just a nice, slow-paced university city. The same thing with Montpellier is it's mostly a university town as well, and it's increasing as a place where a lot of French want to live. So it's developed a lot in the south of France, because you have the Côte d'Azur that's nice, and the beaches, and Montpellier also it's against the mountains, so the weather is very very nice there as well, and it's a lot more affordable. Paris is quite expensive, but when I was in Montpellier, I guess that was the next amount of significant time that I've spent in France, so it was very livable. It's a very livable city.
Mhm. My favorite place in the south of France would have to be Cannes. I loved Cannes. Very beautiful beachside. Especially, of course, people say it's like the Hollywood of France because you
Mm-hmm.
can see the Walk of Fame. And every time I think about Mr. Bean's Holiday, like every time I think of Cannes, it reminds me of Mr. Bean's Holiday, which is a great movie when that came out. I also really like Biarritz. I think Liel is very good. Bergerac is a very nice place. Ajon, very good. Bordeaux is very good. And yeah, great places to go to. Beautiful places, very down to earth. Yeah, I mean, great.
Nice is also Nice
Yeah,
is
Nice
also
too.
very
Yeah,
nice in
yeah,
the
yeah,
south of
Nice, of
France.
course. Nice is very beautiful, very different. It's very different, Nice,
Yeah.
and like especially the mountainside. The Pyrenees mountains are so cool. Absolutely gorgeous place. I love to go. Back there again one day. Hopefully if it still stays the same because with how it's going.
Nice was an interesting time that I had visited also. So I was actually there when they had the Bastille Day attack on July 14th, 2016, and I was in Nice during that attack, and um, I This is also like a lot of my faith in God
Oh,
came
really?
from that
Oh, man,
experience
that must have
being
been.
there.
Do you want to like explain your experience and how terrifying it was and where exact location you were?
Yeah, so actually, so the we arrived to Nice on July 13th, and I remember checking into our hotel, which was about 10 minutes a walk away from the Promenade d'Anglais, where the terrorist attack had occurred. It killed over 100 people and injured over like 600 people when a man had taken a lorry and plowed down the Promenade d'Anglais as people were watching the fireworks for the Bastille. Bastille Day is
Wow, that's
is
insane.
our 4th of
Well,
July.
I actually I did know about the attack, but killing 500 people, like I didn't know it was
100 over
that
100
bad.
people, over 500 people
Oh,
were injured because it was a lorry that went through
I
and
see, I see.
plowed through
Fair enough.
people.
Wow,
Yes,
that's
yes.
absolutely insane.
It was crazy. So like what like fortunate for this, like I was saying, my faith in God really strengthened after this time because we had when we were checking in and the concierge was showing me on a map like, oh, this is where you go to watch the fireworks, and she actually marked on, like, it's ingrained in my head, an X on the map where we should go, me, my mother, and my aunt, to go watch the fireworks. And it was exactly where the lorry had gone and hit all those people. And the next morning when we were planning our Bastille Day activities, I actually had enough points in my I was working corporate life at that time. I had enough points to move our hotels and to a luxury hotel over in Cannes. So for that one day, we then switched to a hotel that was in Cannes, which was located about like 10 miles down from where the lorry had hit the people. So I'm watching as I'm watching the fireworks, I see a bunch of police starting to gather around, and the security measures being heightened. And I'm like, what is going on here? And then I dropped off my mom and my aunt to the hotel, and I continued to walk around. And then they said that there was an attack that had happened down the Promenade d'Anglais. And then so the next morning we switched back to our hotel in Nice, which was located a 10-minute walk from that spot. And that's what I walked around seeing all of the the police tape, all the vigils being put up, and it was just a solemn, sad sight with all the with flowers being put up, and learning what was going on, and talking to just talking to the people on the street. And this was before I was reporting, and I did go like live on my Facebook just as a tourist, talking to people, and then them saying like, this is something that's now shaped their experience of Nice. And like, I had enough points even just to move us down, because 5 weeks prior to that, when I was out of town working on a client in Kentucky, my flight out of Cincinnati was canceled earlier that day. So I got rebooked to fly out of Louisville. And then I'm on the tarmac about to take off, and then my flight gets canceled as I'm on the tarmac. So I'm like, what are the chances I have two independent flights from two different airports and I cannot get home to New York today? And so as a result of that, I had to stay overnight in Louisville for another day, which gave me additional points into my account, which ultimately was the reason we were able to switch hotels that evening. And so I'm very thankful for that, to have then moved us out from exactly where that X marks the spot where we were supposed to be that moment on July 14th. And I think that also started to shape my internal need and desire to be reporting. To be reporting at these types of scenes, because when I reported in Uvalde earlier last year, I just happened to have landed in San Antonio Airport, and one of my friends, I was going to be covering the border crisis, and heading over to Eagle Pass. And as soon as I landed, one of my colleagues had asked like, how far are you from San Antonio? And I'm like, I just landed at the airport. And they're like, active shooter in Uvalde that's an hour away from you. I hopped an Uber, and I was at the Uvalde school even before a lot of the news trucks and police. I saw police ushering some of the parents there. And so that started to shape a lot of my reporting to be less on the political side of things, but understanding things from really a human perspective of what these events do, to see them as crisis situations for humanity, as opposed to how politicians are playing with our lives.
Oh yeah, absolutely. When you look at a lot of these shootings and a lot of these terror attacks, one thing is I just want to point out is that whether it's the Buffalo shooter, whether it was the Buffalo shooter in America or whether it was the New Zealand mosque shooter, or whether it was, the Muslim, like the Islamic person, who killed a lot of the people, in what's that place in France again you were mentioning?
In Nice?
Yeah, in Nice, and also in
Okay.
Paris, and also whether it was,
Yeah, Paris. Paris has
the
quite a bit.
bridge attack in England, and
Hmm.
the Germany, and
There's a
also the
concert that was
beheading,
attacked here.
and something, it's it resonates to, like a lot of these shooters, the Buffalo shooter and the mosque shooter in New Zealand, were inspired by the shooters, were inspired by the Azov Battalion in Ukraine, the far right group, which is absolutely hideous, the far right Nazi group. And when you look at the CIA and like all of that, knowing the fact that the CIA has a lot of connections and funds like a lot of Al Qaeda and ISIS and the Azov Battalion, it's just screwed. It's just stuff, because I feel like a lot of these, things, they're set up, they're provoked, especially when they know a lot of these people are mentally ill, but they just don't do anything
Hmm.
about it. It's just absolutely insane, Tara.
Yeah, yeah. And then like the connections that you mentioned, even with like the CIA. I think back to how a lot of things that we didn't learn from our history as Americans. For instance, I didn't learn about like the genocide that happened in Cambodia until I was actually in
Oh, not
Cambodia with
just
the rise of
Cambodia, Rwanda too. The
Rwanda.
genocide of
Hmm.
Rwanda. The genocide
Yeah,
that's
we
happening
don't.
right now that's been happening for 8 years in the Donbass region and the Donbass region of the far right neo Nazis killing ethnic Russians there. The genocide of
Hmm.
Armenians, which is also Armenia, which is funded by the CIA. The
Hmm.
genocide that's
The
happening in
links
the
that it
region.
has, the links that has to the things that that our American government does, like with the rise of Pol Pot in the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, that was in response to the Vietnam War and to the bombs that were being dropped in Cambodia, and that was like our hidden a hidden war that was happening in Cambodia that we don't learn as American
It's
citizens
insane.
or
It's
in
just like the
American history. I had to
Yugoslavian
go there
war.
to learn about it.
It's just like the Yugoslavian war. That war was done by,
Hmm.
Yugoslavia. I mean, you may disagree with socialism. I mean, Yugoslavia did have its problem, but beautiful country. Very beautiful country. My friend had my friend's, one of my old friend's mother lived in Yugoslavia in the 70s, and it was beautiful country. Very down to earth, very functioning society. And then NATO came in 1990 and funded, pretty much, the Kosovo army at the time who wanted to vote for independence and destroyed that country. It's just
Hmm.
like, basically like, pretty much the North Korean War, and it's just like Vietnam, and it's just like, Brazil, and it's just like, Syria and Lebanon, they're all connected. And it's just absolutely insane how the CIA, whether it's Operation Mockingbird or Operation Paperclip or Operation Desert Storm, which was, a violation of the UN right for the United States to go in there, invade Iraq when it did moment of destruction, especially in the Yugoslavian war, when that was never, allowed. They bombed it illegally and bombed, Serbia and Kosovo in a bad way. And it's just absolutely insane. Speaking of that, Tara, right now, your country, Poland,
Hmm.
is having a bit of a crisis at the moment. And that crisis is that a lot of the immigrants that the Polish prime minister, and I don't know much about Polish politics, but from what I'm getting from reading a lot of analysts from Russian Time News and Sputnik News, apparently Poland is letting in, it has more of refugees, Ukrainian refugees, than
Hmm.
most other countries do. And apparently it's collapsing the welfare state, it's collapsing the economic system. Like, as a guy, as a guy who like read a lot about Poland, especially in the years of 2019, how did that happen? Like, Poland was supposed to be a country that had strong borders. How on earth did that happen? Did Poland like get taken over by a globalist lately? And what is your fear of, Poland in the future going forward? Do you think that Poland is going to become like Sweden and France and just be completely, overwhelmed and just become like a second world country? Because it's not looking good at the moment, especially with the inflation rate there.
Hmm. So Poland has a very good relationship with Ukraine, and in terms of from a cultural and people perspective, the cultures are very similar. So they're comrades, they're brothers. So there is a brotherhood that exists between Ukraine and Poland, and of course with it sharing the border, Poland has had open arms when it comes to accepting the refugees. I think the rest of the world, and when it comes to the Ukrainian refugees, do need to do more. So that way the weight doesn't go completely onto Poland, because Poland has accepted, as you said, more Ukrainian refugees than all of the other countries. It's accepted more than 3 million. With the population, Poland's population is like 37 million.
50,
So to be
80 million,
increased
50 million, 50 million, 80 million, I saw on your Instagram post.
in no, I think it's less. The Polish population is around like 37 million, I want to say, but you guys can fact check me on that. But it's still a massive increase. It's like overall it's still a massive increase of the population jump that has occurred in such a short period of time. So that's of course going to put a massive constraint onto its existing social system, because Poland does do a lot to be taking care of ultimately like the family unit. That is a big basis of Polish government, with providing financial support to families when they have children. Every year they also get a stipend when kids are going back to school. So a lot of their policies are to be the social welfare of the family unit. And so with accepting refugees, and then also providing these types of programs to them and extending it to them, like with any country, and what we see when any country is going to overextend itself, it's going to put that pressure, and ultimately can their financial systems shoulder that with such a quick increase in population? Just as an outsider looking in, like, I would say no.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's going to be causing a lot of problems. It's when you're weighing out, like, as a what is right to do for a society, but at the same time where you need to draw an individual boundary. I think a government and a country needs to be running their country the way that I would run my house. Like, yes, do I want to save the world? Of course, like my family, everybody, we have good hearts, but at the same time, you need to put a boundary that's up. Like, if my father were to be feeding people in the streets and then not feeding me as my father's child, I feel very bad about that. So as a citizen of a country, when I see that we're not receiving our due, and then when it's being handed out, then it's like, what the heck? Like in my friends the other day, my French friends were telling me how with the illegal immigration that comes through, once people are here, they actually give them like a stipend of like 500 euros. So that's a lot of money to be handing out to people who are not citizens, or not necessarily the responsibility of the country. But it's a nice thing to do, but when you're doing that at the offset of your own citizens, so now with these pension reforms, and people pay a lot in taxes in France. Like, it's crazy that so it's their money that's basically being stolen by the government when these type of programs are being put in place, because they're the ones who are shouldering the weight for other people at their own detriment. And that's where we need to draw a line as individuals, as a culture, and a society and a community, that yes, we want to take care of people who are on the outside, but at the same time, like, if you overload a lifeboat, the point of the lifeboat, you're not going to end up saving anybody. The entire lifeboat is going to collapse. And that's what's happening in Poland and in many of our countries.
Yeah, especially like with COVID after that and the economic damage that did, Can I ask you a question? What do you think is the biggest problem with Polish politics at the moment? Because it seems to be, right now there seems to be a lot of globalists trying to take over Poland, government and stuff. And do you think, there's a way that Poland can break out of the European Union? Because I do think a lot of, Polish people want to get out of the European Union, especially NATO too. NATO is very, very bad. Do you think Poland would be better without the European Union, or no?
I don't know necessarily if Poland is going to be better off with the European Union. There are certain balances that Poland needs to, or the EU needs to strike in order to have Poland stay as a player in the game, because Poland is over since its communist days has been increasing a lot in its GDP, and has been doing very well as a major economy in Europe. And the time period that I was in Poland, I had also covered several of the strikes that were protests that were against NATO and against the EU. And a big thing about it is Poland has one of the oldest constitutions. I believe it was second in the world, first in Europe, for its constitution. So a big conundrum is between the European Union rules and regulations versus Poland's own constitution as to which is going to lay as supreme in the land. And so the Polish courts have ruled that the Polish constitution, those rights and those laws are above anything that will come from the EU. So of course this poses a massive controversy in terms of its membership. And there are people who are taking to the streets in protesting against its membership in the EU, against NATO. Here in France, there are several protests that are against
against the
NATO.
war in Ukraine, that is giving the amount of money that's going to Ukraine, which shouldn't be allowed at all.
It's a lot of money that's going through, but you also have to understand from a Polish perspective, like not only do you have the camaraderie that is the brothership, the brotherhood that's between Poland and Ukraine, but also from since Poland was a Soviet occupied, they do see it as if Ukraine were to fall, that's like Poland's next. Putin's coming for Poland right after Ukraine. So that also is part of the reason why Poland is so supportive of making sure that Ukraine is able to fight, because if Ukraine falls, next in line is going to be Poland. But also in terms of Poland being a member of NATO, if Putin were to strike against Poland, then you have the backing of the European Union and NATO to be supportive of Poland. So you got all those intricacies that are balanced out.
What do you think about the theory about Ukraine hitting Poland with a fake missile? Because that was a bit, creepy, isn't it?
It's hard to believe what some of the stuff that is being reported on mainstream media. They had the Phantom.
They lied about a lot of things.
They lie about a lot of stuff.
They said that Russia's losing the war, which they're not. They're saying that inflation was going to cut Russia. It's not the ruble was doing as good, as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Just to let you confirm something, a lot of people are predicting that, of course, right now, Ukraine is out of electricity. They're losing the war. They're losing men. President Zelensky is just grifting off this war as hard. The Azov Battalion is losing the war. And Eastern Ukraine, pretty much Russia, are only focusing on going focusing on going off the parts of Eastern Ukraine, because they voted to be a part of the Russian Federation back in 2014, which was stopped by the United States, but now they're a part. There's been rumors that apparently Poland and Moldova might take the left side of Ukraine. What is your opinions on that?
I'm not familiar with those rumors. So whether or not they're true or not, or if Poland were to be, as in taking over in forms of government or integrating those territories as part of the Polish state, that's what the rumors are?
Yeah, that's what the rumors is.
Even though the cultures
it probably might not happen, because Poland right now, they don't have a lot of money. I mean, there could be economic reasons, but
I think Poland is because even though they have a good relationship with Ukraine in terms of the people, I don't know if that's necessarily feasible for them to be taking on an expansion of territories. And I didn't get the feel that from Polish government that they're looking to expand territories. Maybe they're looking to help and bolster, but in terms of actually integrating that to expand, who you got to think about in modern history, it's only Russia that's looking to increase its landmass and its state. But what countries these days are looking to actually expand into it? Because I would understand more if that area was considered historically part of Poland, because Poland has disappeared off of the map several times throughout its history.
Poland was huge recarved. It was the Polish Empire.
Its territory has been recarved a bunch of
just
different
like Russia.
times. So,
Russia used to own Finland. It used to own this. It used to own that. Ukraine is a funny one. It's a country, right now that has a lot of corruption, a lot of greed, especially with the far-right neo-Nazis, bombing, killing a lot of the ethnic Russians. I think at the end of the war, which I think Ukraine is going to lose, I mean, they're so close to losing. I think what's going to happen, President Zelensky is going to resign. He's probably going to go to the United States or somewhere. And I think Ukraine is just, I think what Russia's going to do, they're just going to focus on the eastern part of Ukraine because they don't want the other part of Ukraine because Western Ukraine is pretty much too Western. And I think what's going to happen is Ukraine is just going to be left as a third world dump. But a lot of Ukrainians, they don't like Zelensky. They want him gone. A lot of Ukrainians, they're protesting against Zelensky because he's pretty much putting them, in a war zone. And they're not liking it. They're not liking it, what's going on, And if you look at right now, like a lot of these Ukrainians, they're being forced to go to war. It's becoming, especially Zelensky, pretty much, taking so much money from the White House and funding neo-Nazis. Here's the thing. As a British person and a Welsh guy, seeing, our taxpayers' money go to neo-Nazis in Ukraine, it's just messed up. Like we did, like our ancestors in World War II, great grandfathers in World War II did not fight, for that to happen. It's like absolutely outrageous.
I hear you. The thing is, like when Ukraine is accepting and needing help from other countries, they did like lay down their arsenal in the past as part of the agreement to be having this type of protection from if Russia were to be coming into this. So do we have a responsibility to be helping Ukraine? I do feel like we do have a responsibility to a degree, not to the point that we're at our, detrimenting our own people, because like I said, in my own household, I think you need to put your family and your children first before helping those who are outside of your house. But to a degree, we do have a responsibility to be helping Ukraine. And then also as a Polish person, like I said, if Putin goes through Ukraine, I think he's a crazy man. I think that it puts Poland at risk if Ukraine were to fall.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, Tara, so what is your opinion right now? So right now, a lot of, the Republican Party, it seems to be having like a lot of, conflict of each other. There seems to be a lot of, civil disobedience like that. And you've kind of gone off a bit, of Donald Trump. What is your opinion like on, the feed with DeSantis and the feed with, Trump, and like what's happening, with the House and the midterm elections? How do you feel towards that? And how do you feel, America's going into 2024? Do you think Donald Trump has got a good chance of winning? Or do you think there's a chance that maybe Americans, we could see something that happened, in like the midterms in 2022? And do you think there's a chance that Texas, New Hampshire, and Florida could succeed from the union, which they have been thought about doing? And do you think they would be able to survive economically on their own?
A lot of million-dollar questions there for you. I don't think that our states are going to be succeeding, even if they want to. Florida, we have the slogan of like "Make America Florida," and I'm very proud to be a Floridian. I would rather see DeSantis being pushed forward as opposed to Trump, honestly. Like, even though I was a very big Trump supporter in the previous election, turning from a anti-Trumper from the previous election before that, even amongst my own family, for example, my mom was very anti-Trump, and she said to me that she's not voting for Biden. So therefore, by default, she's going to end up voting for Trump. So you have a lot of people who vote against the person that they dislike. And so I think that's another thing with American politics, and then our support for our politicians. It's not necessarily that people are pro, that they're just voting against, at least from the liberal and the leftist side. Of course, from the Republicans and conservatives, people who are pro-Trump, it's not that they're anti-Biden, they're actually pro-Trump. I do feel that DeSantis, I am a huge supporter of him, of how he was able to govern Florida throughout the pandemic and the policies he put into place. And obviously it has resonated very well with a lot of the US, because we've had a huge jump in population with people who are moving to Florida, because they like how Florida is running. And so I would like to see DeSantis being pushed forward. I feel like there's been a lot of drama in the last several months when it comes to the Republican side, and that's not necessarily important. That's probably why I've taken a lot of step back from politics in the last several months, because
how do you feel as Kevin
the drama
McCartney
aspect of it?
How do you feel as Kevin McCartney as a Speaker of the House? Because there's a lot of dodgy things about him. Like Laura Loomer did an
Mhm.
absolutely fantastic job of exposing, him. He's a member of the WEF. He wants to give more money to Ukraine, which that money should be going to more important things. He also
Mhm.
wants to give, other stuff, which to elitists and bankers. And he also, by the way, Kevin McCartney also, he criticized, Trump on January 6th, which we all know was this. He
Mhm.
criticized, on other things. What is your opinion, on him being, Speaker of the House? And do you think he's going to be any good, or is he just going to be another fraud?
I don't think he's necessarily good for the Republican Party, in the sense of like his policies and his stances and his actions are things that go against what Republicans and conservatives actually want. So, like as an elected official, I think you need to be acting by the will of the people, because that's the job that you're being put into place for. And then also with the splintering that's going on within the Republicans themselves, this is going to further weaken the party. And with us going into elections for next year, we need to have representatives and voices that are going to be unifying the Republicans and the conservatives. And I don't think he's the best person for that. Do I know who is the best? No, but him, I don't think that he's going to be doing a service to the Republicans and to the conservatives with pushing us into the 2024 elections.
Mm-hmm. What is your opinion on the drama between the Daily Wire and Steven Crowder? Who do you think is in the right? Why? And did you think it was good for Steven Crowder to record the video call? Because some people say it was good, some people say it was bad. And what do you think about the whole opinion towards, like the Daily Wire saying they're for freedom of speech? And there's a lot of dodgy accusations that Candace Owens isn't actually who she really is, that she's also, a grifter and a fraud. And what is your opinion towards, how in that leak recording video, how basically they said the Daily Wire would give credit cuts, to people on their contracts, money cuts, basically.
As a content creator who does post, my platforms, I use YouTube, even though I gripe about, I just got off of a strike literally like 2 days ago, from a interview with a freedom of speech activist. That was a video that's almost more than 2 years old, and we were discussing freedom of speech and the First Amendment, and then that got cited as harassment.
Oh, that's
And
ridiculous. That's
I,
absolutely
when
ridiculous.
Exactly. And when I appealed it and I asked who's being harassed, what community is being harassed, what language is being used as harassment, who's being bullied, give me a timestamp of these violations, YouTube just comes back and says, no, this is harassment, and just, apply the strike into my account, which now stays on for the next 3 months. And I
Oh,
just got off
God.
I just got off an expiration for another strike for another video that was more than 2 years old also, in which that was striked for misinformation for the elections. We were not even discussing, you can't make the claim that the was stolen. You can't say that as one of the community guidelines. That video wasn't even saying that. We were just talking about January 6th. So I know that and when I appealed it, of course, they can't give me a timestamp. They can't give me any specific details. They just say no. And so as a content creator, this is extremely frustrating to be putting out content and having my platform constantly at risk for being dispelled from YouTube. Are there other areas I can be using? Yes, Rumble, yes, BitChute. But at the same time, you have it's the community square. So it is important to have a presence on YouTube. Unfortunately, as much as I gripe about it and I disagree with their community policies, am I still on the platform? Yes, I am. And so so in terms of Steven Crowder exposing what Daily Wire has in their contracts, it is very hypocritical, because these are supposed to be giving us alternative ways of fighting against big tech. So as a content creator, and I'd have to, if there were ever for me to be going on to Daily Wire and then to be further penalized for things that are not in control, to be playing within the rules, as by being part of the YouTube community, I am actually trying to play within the rules and dance around it, that I can still communicate my message without being ousted out. But I'm not even posting things that are risk-taking. Like, these talking about the First Amendment, it should not be a risk-taking thing, but evidently it is. Evidently, talking about the First Amendment and promoting freedom of speech, not even using the language that I may disagree with, saying certain words I might disagree from an emotional human perspective, but you got the right to say it. And so that's extremely frustrating as a content creator. So I think Steven Crowder was completely in the right to be exposing this. Is it detrimental to himself? Probably, because it's difficult to being as an independent person. I'm glad that he is at that level and strength. And when people give him subscriptions, they are funding him to fight on their behalf. So he's doing exactly what he should be doing by exposing. This is going to be at a detriment, though, in terms of conservatives and infighting that's going on. It's an important thing to have come forward with, but it's also something that, from an emotional standpoint, is dismaying. That Daily Wire, who I did have subscriptions before, and I'm a huge fan of Candace Owens and the programs that are put forward by the Daily Wire. So to hear that they're actually embedded with big tech is extremely disappointing. And I hope for the success of Daily Wire to not, I don't want it to fall apart. I want them to improve and then to be on our side, truly on our side, because they have a huge platform. So I don't see Daily Wire as being like, oh, we should not, support Daily Wire anymore.
Are you a fan of Brett Cooper? Do you like Brett Cooper?
I like her work. Yeah. I do follow her.
She's really, really nice. I'm not a fan of Ben Shapiro or Candace Owens, but I like Brett Cooper and Jordan Peterson. Brett Cooper is really, really,
Yeah. So I do like the programming that's put out there. Like, the contracts that they have in place that are penalizing like people like me, independent content creators, like that needs to change. And so I do hope that with this exposure and pointing what's in those contracts, and recording and providing the receipts, like, hey, they are doing this. I hope that Daily Wire will just improve itself and be and yes, you have to come up with a business model that functions, but come up with a business model that is not hypocritical. Otherwise, you will lose support.
That's true. So, Tara, before we finish off, is there anything else you'd like to say?
I just want to thank you for giving me time on your platform and the opportunity to shed light what's going on here in France. I don't feel like the mainstream media really is covering it as much, and it is just the start of these particular pension reform protests. But I do see it as evolving in the next several weeks, just on the streets and talking amongst my friends and understanding more about French culture. This is something that is a big deal. We saw how quickly things can spiral out of control when it came to the Yellow Vest movement. I don't think that social upheaval is necessarily the recourse that we need to be going to. I don't want to be seeing violence occur from it. So the French way is to strike first and then negotiate later, which is another thing that I feel like we can learn in the US in terms of making a more impactful and approach to our own protests. So there's a lot of things that from American protesters can learn from the French. So I do thank you for this time that you've given me to talk about what's going on here in France. And people can find me on my channel on YouTube. It's On the Ground with Tara. And for those who want to just enjoy some leisure travel activities, I do have a travel channel, and that's Take Off with Tara.
It's a very good travel channel. I really enjoyed it. You going to Morocco, you went there for a bit, which was awesome. Yeah. I love to go to Morocco. I just want to say thank you for coming on, Tara, and God bless you. And I just want to say, everyone, thank you for joining the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 91. Please go subscribe and like Tara's channel. She's a fantastic content creator. You can learn a lot about French politics from her, and also traveling guide. She does a great traveling guide channel. And I just want to remember, please, everybody, to like and subscribe this video. Please also subscribe to my Rumble and my my Odyssey account. For my main channel on YouTube has also got strikes at the moment, which is not very nice. It's pretty struggling. So, yeah, have a nice day, everybody. Thank you for joining the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 91. Take care. Bye.